I'm going to do something also new to this podcast. I'm going to go from a board game to a video game. What up? What are you going to do about it? You can't do nothing because you're in Utah.
I'm going to edit it out.
It's
just
true.
going to be blank for 15 minutes now. Just blank sound.
Damn.
Blank sound? Also, there's a better word for that. Silence.
Please, sir, please leave me in the podcast.
Anyway.
No, so I really want to talk about a video game turned card game called The Binding of Isaac Rebirth. Four Souls. Rebirth is the video game. Four Souls is the card game. And The Binding of Isaac Four Souls is the card game that I want to talk about today. So, many, many years ago, I downloaded this little game called The Binding of Isaac, which, have you played at all?
Oh, yeah. I played the crap out of Rebirth.
So, for those that don't know, The Binding of Isaac is a computer game in which you take control of, like, a naked baby. All right? Stay with me. A naked baby who uses his tears as projectiles to kill all sorts of things that live under his mom's basement. All right? Still with me? If not, I'm sorry, but please, there will be stuff to talk about here. And, like The Legend of Zelda, you will have a bunch of enemies in a room. You have to get rid of all the enemies or pass through all the traps, go on to the next room eventually until you find the boss of that, which I'm not even going to get into in terms of the types of disgusting bosses that you can end up fighting. And there can also be in a special room a chest that grants you a permanent ability that can mix with all other sorts of different abilities you accumulate throughout a run in the game, because each run of the game takes about, 30 minutes to an hour, depending on how long you end up kind of wandering the rooms. And all sorts of weird, crazy things can happen. And it became a sensation, I think. There have been sequels and expansions and fan-made content. It's been quite a game that ended up trying to be, like, wasn't meant to be anything, really, and ended up becoming a fan favorite over the course of many years, has now blossomed into a card game called Four Souls. So in this game, we are playing the game, The Binding of Isaac, as a card game, which is 2 to 4 players. Studio 71 published it. Edward McMillan is the designer and illustrator of the game, as he has done with all the rest of the types of games that he has played. Or that he has made, excuse me. And what you do is you pick a character, and that character has the starting item that has a ability for it in the card game. So, for instance, like Isaac starts with the D6. I think Cain starts with the Book of Belial. And what you're doing is it's like a little take that card game where you have these loot cards that give you like coins or pills or chests or things that allow you to, accumulate different resources throughout the game that you can use to buy items. And there will be a monster deck, and each monster will have a certain number of hit points and abilities that you do. And some of these monsters will be some of the bosses in the game that have higher hit points, but if you kill them, you claim their soul. And then the first one to claim 4 souls wins. So each turn is pretty simple. You draw a loot card, you play loot cards from your hands, and then you can fight somebody. And when you fight somebody, essentially you fight until you either live or die. And you gather all the resources. And much like Magic the Gathering, there's like a stack. So kind of things that you do, people can respond to you and make your day a lot less fun. And that's how the game works. It's really simple to play. You get this big, huge, like, card box that is like what you find at a card store, a board game store, to store like extra cards for Magic the Gathering that you lift up, and then you just set all the decks around and start playing. And yeah, I played with my brother, who was also a Binding of Isaac fan, and at 2 players it is kind of a little weird. I think with 3 or 4 it works a lot better, but it was serviceable at 2 player. I'm trying to think. Yeah, it really put to life The Binding of Isaac as a game into a card game, I think, to a certain extent. Now, let me explain. So I really felt like the game could have done much more justice to mimic the computer game itself, right? Like Dark Souls, the board game, does a good job, for better or for worse, depending on who you are, where it mimics the mechanics of the game. In this game, you have the aesthetic and general componentry to be like, okay, this is something that I can really see and feel in the Binding of Isaac, but the actions you do or the things you do to the other players don't make a whole lot of sense. It's just kind of there as a mechanic. So, to me at that point, that's where the game kind of falters. I could easily see cards being played from a deck that creates this map that you're kind of going through and exploring together and accumulating the same types of resources, and so it builds and builds and builds. At the same time, though, I'm not necessarily disappointed. I think for those that were a fan of the game will really like the card game and have fun with it. It will take a specific kind of person, though, to enjoy the card game if they don't know what the game is, because the imagery in it is pretty putrid. It's pretty disgusting. Some of it may also be offensive to a certain degree based upon what it is. So I don't know. It's a weird flex, but hey, I'm using the terminology that kids use these days.
It's a weird flex. Okay, this game, I think, has a lot of expectations behind it. And what I mean about that is there is this idea of these card games coming from popular culture, let's say, right? You have a Joking Hazard from Cyanide and Happiness. You have this one, and you have, there are others out there where a famous or a popular IP, whether it be a video game or something else, converted to like a simple game, right? That could be considered maybe a cash grab or something like that, which I hate that term. I don't really necessarily agree with it. And so I actually went into this with hesitancy. I was a big Binding of Isaac fan, super big fan. And I was watching the Kickstarter video. I was like, man, I don't even know. He's done fantastic video games. He did Super Meat Boy as well, right?
Yeah,
Same
he did.
guy. Yeah.
He did.
So like his games are just fantastic in that medium. And so then when I watched the Kickstarter video and I'm like, I don't know if he could translate this or have those same, it's a different skill set to make a board game. But then I saw like in the background, there's copies of Gloomhaven and other popular tabletop games. I was like, oh, so he knows kind of the expectations here, where I feel like my expectations still wouldn't be like, oh, this game is going to be an amazing card game. But it's more of this is a fun experiment from a guy who makes great video games. I'd be really interested to see how this plays out in a card game. And it sounds like it's kind of hitting that mark exactly. Like it's fun if you know the IP. It's fun to kind of tinker around with. It's not like an amazing top tier game, but it sounds like it'd be worth it to play with people who are also fans of the game. Is that accurate?
I would say that's extremely accurate.
Okay.
Again, coming from me, I can easily see the correlation of having this be an exploration co-op / competitive game where you're making these floors and you're fighting bosses and stuff like that. But honestly, also at the same time, I see this card game making sense too.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
meaning it could be themed a different way and be fine.
Yeah, I think you know what? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, the card mechanics behind it aren't necessarily too complicated. I just think that it has so much from that IP that lifts it up so much that the card game itself, again, works well. But yeah, you could pretty much kind of throw anything behind it.
Did you play the soundtrack in the background?
No, but that would have been fun though.
That would have been fun.
Yeah, man. Now the more I'm thinking about it, it's just like, I could totally. I've made mention of it so many times about how I would create something like that. Maybe I don't know. In any case, I don't want people to be thrown off by it. I think people should give it a shot, especially if there's a fan or two of the game that's like, hey, let's give this game a shot. It's very lightweight, almost filler-like in a sense, because you can be done in a game in like 15 to 30 minutes. So it really fills in that part of, in that spectrum of game. But yeah, I would just say though, like, I think the most people that are going to enjoy it are going to be those Binding of Isaac fans that have played the game. I think it's going to be a hard sell for anyone to pick up this game and be like, oh yeah, this sounds fun. Or it's going to be it's like a specific Venn diagram, right? People who
Mm-hmm.
like card games specifically take that. People who like Binding of Isaac. And then in that very, very thin middle part is going to be those purchasers of the game, which at the same time, though, the Kickstarter did phenomenally well. So
Yeah. No, I'm sure there's overlap as well. Do you think this game would be a good way to bring maybe a friend of yours who's not into board games but is into video games, maybe like as a good introduction to this world?
only if they played Binding of Isaac.
Only if they played Binding of Isaac.
Only if they play Binding of Isaac, and if they have a good sense of disgusting humor, I would say.
Well, yeah, and it sounds like, well, in general, it's not a hard transition sometimes from video games to board games, especially if there's a bridge like that, right? Yeah, that's
Correct.
interesting. That's cool.
That is The Binding of Isaac 4 Souls by Edward Biblin. Oh, no.
Nailed it.
Bam, 10 out of 10 would say again.
Would
Edward
say.
McMillan in Studio 71. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm so excited. It's like 71 Studio 71 publishing the game. I'm done. Cut. Over.